This is the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the podcast series on power sector leaders, we're going to talk to Scott Corwin, President and CEO of one of the real leaders in the power sector, the American Public Power Association, APPA, which represents not-for-profit, community-owned utilities in 2,000 towns and cities serving over 55 million people. Scott's going to describe what public power is, what publicly owned utilities are, and what APPA has done and is doing to empower community-owned utilities to deliver affordable, reliable electricity. Scott became APPA's president and CEO in August 2023. Before that, he was executive director of the Northwest Public Power Association, executive director of the Public Power Council, and he was government affairs and public policy supervisor for Oregon investor-owned utility Portland General Electric. He began his 35-year career working on policy and legislation in the Oregon House of Representatives and with legendary Oregon Senator Mark Hatfield. So, Scott, what are public power utilities, and what's the history and current membership of APPA? What services do public power utilities deliver, and how are they different than investor-owned utilities?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, Herman. It's really an honor to be with you today. And yeah, public power utilities are not-for-profit, community-owned electric utilities, typically operated by units of state or local government. Those take different forms in different areas as far as the actual governance, but that's the basic part of it. And they're one of, as you suggested, three basic different types of electric utility governance structures in the United States, in addition to the investor-owned utilities and the rural electric cooperatives. Yeah, as you said, we serve about 55 million people in 49 different states, and they serve about 15% of total U.S. customers, and started way back in the 1880s, grew up with the industry itself of electrification in the early days. These were just places where the communities wanted to take on this initiative themselves, or the companies at the time weren't serving them. And some of those were really rural, less populated areas, and therefore not, the targets for others on the early days of electricity. And that kind of self-starter attitude and ethic is part of the hallmark of public power, because again, you're answering to locally elected officials, and the actual consumers locally are determining in the end who is running the utility and what the rates are for that service. It's typically we represent and work mostly on the electricity side. Many of these communities, of course, are also overseeing water, sewer, some gas, some broadband. So the whole array of utilities. Some of our members themselves manage multiple service lines that way. Their focus, like ours, is on that reliable, affordable electricity for those customers in there, and these are their neighbors, their local businesses. Our association itself, though, started in 1940 at sort of that where you really saw that ramp up of creation of utilities across the United States. And right before that, of course, through that New Deal era and electrification push. And then in World War II, public power played a critical role in the war effort too, as you saw these electricities serving some of those key war industries and then growing from there. So this is our 85th year this year. We're celebrating.
Happy birthday. I think that's a really important and interesting distinction. I don't want to put any value on it, but it's interesting that public power utilities often have city elected officials running them, whereas investor-owned utilities have private interests that they're traded on the stock exchange. Their shares and their shareholders play a big role, and they're regulated by their commissions. Whereas public power utilities generally are regulated by uh, elected officials in the cities, like Austin Energy, San Antonio has CPS Power, Sacramento Municipal Utilities District, LA DWP. These are run by elected officials, so they have a different kind of relationship to the public, don't they?
That's sure, that's correct. They are directly accountable that way. And you mentioned some of our largest members, and it is interesting with those 2,000 public power entities across the United States and 5 territories, actually. You have some of those largest cities. You also have some of the smallest cities. So
Hmm.
our average customer level, about 50% of our members are around 2,000 customers or smaller. So communities of around 4,000 people or so is our average. But then, so many of them are smaller, but same setup. They answer to those elected officials locally.
And there are also huge public power utility entities, Tennessee Valley Authority and Salt River Project in Arizona, right? That's public power of a sort too, right?
Yes, there a lot of these entities, including even some of the power marketing administration, set up to serve power and mostly market it to public power and to cooperatives in those instances. But yes, and many of our members get their power and transmission from joint action agencies, which is a form that helps especially smaller and medium-sized utilities to aggregate those services through a larger entity that has this expertise and the buying power to collectively get the power and transmission and other services lined up for these utilities.
Interesting. I want to talk about what APPA is doing now, but before we do, just briefly, a little bit, I want to talk about what APPA has done in the past. You mentioned service during World War II. Um, the and it's interesting because your membership ranges from very large organizations to relatively small, and like the rest of the country, there's a sort of a diversity of things that are getting done. In the past, though, how has APPA led the growth of and the benefits of publicly owned power?
Yes, in the past and actually right through the present, the way we've done that, with that same vision all along of reliable, affordable power for all, uh, the way we've delivered on that mission has been really in three general areas. One is advocacy, so that's government relations and regulatory, so legislative and regulatory advocacy. Then we run a set of technical programs and certifications to support those utilities on the operational side. And then we operate as really a convener, a creator of a platform and a place for folks to come together and share best practices and learn from each other. And as you said in the past, that was really important in the early days. It's really important now. It was just as important in the early days of the industry because some of these things, these were new. This was a new technology, electricity itself, the ability to build out a distribution system, to figure out the long-term transmission and wholesale power part of that, to figure out how to train your crews. So that some of those elements all along APPA's had a role in. In fact, even on those pieces we were just mentioning where you had during the World War II era or beyond, you had a lot of federal legislation actually to create some of the infrastructure that allowed us to irrigate vast portions of the country and create hydropower um, and transmission systems. And so APPA was there all along through that. APPA has been there as we've moved forward to try to make sure the regulatory burden is not to heavy on utilities, trying to serve their communities. We've been there to help create some of the financial mechanisms and protect those that communities use. And recently, an example would be to make the tax credits that are being used for creation of energy infrastructure or generation available even to not-for-profit entities. That's a level of the playing field that we'd worked hard for a long time on.
Yeah,
That's an example on the advocacy side. Example on the
yeah,
program side, we have things like we create a safety manual that the industry uses using it's a collaboration with our members using their expertise and then making it available to all of our members and helping them compare each other on what they do for reliability. We have a designation program. So there's a lot of things like that that we're able to do by bringing people together.
well, and we're going to talk about policy, which is a big subject right now. But before we get to that, um, two examples of what might be happening now, you just described. APPA has these recently has these training courses for energy storage, data center demand and artificial intelligence, and transportation electrification for your members. Um, and I imagine these are subjects that are critical to public power providers as to any other utility. But you serve two other ways to your members because you are able to create shared learning through your membership, and you're able to create the sort of value of people that may not have the resources that an investor-owned utility has, um, by having different members share their different learnings on these new technologies, like how is somebody handling data center demand and artificial intelligence? How is somebody adding energy storage, right?
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit about why these training courses on these in these subject areas is so critical to public power providers, and how APPA is helping them develop that understanding.
Yeah, thanks, Herman. It's a great question because in that specific example, that in some areas, large increase in load, especially from data centers, but also from other industries that come in, and just from the electrification, it's larger and smaller depending upon where you are, but most areas are seeing some growth, and in some areas, really significant growth. And when especially in a smaller community, you may not have seen that before. It may be a very different dynamic. You're used to economic development coming in smaller chunks. And so there are significant issues to think through the pros and cons. There can be large benefits to a community, including having that large electric load that you can rely on, and that can add revenue and it can add jobs. The other flip side to that is it is a lot of issues to deal with, and it's a lot all at once. And so we have these examples, and we have these members where we had one that's helped speak to some of our members and help them learn how you walk through the contractual arrangements up front, what you look for in land use, and how you work with your local community and your local development agencies. What are all the things, and then not even to mention it when you get to how are you going to supply this load? Can you line up the arrangements on the transmission and the generation side, or the contractual power arrangements? So, some of these have seen, one utility was around a $30 million annual revenue utility. It's now 10 times that size from data load.
Wow.
We have another that's grown to having about 50% of the load it serves by volume just in data centers. So they've got some experience to share with others on what the pros and cons are, and how you try to, if you're going to take this on, how you try to make sure they're mostly pros for your community, and that it is a benefit.
It's something that you don't think about, that APPA is just so vital for. contractual guidance. Uh,
Mhm.
Here's a utility that's essentially run by publicly elected politicians, and
Mhm.
they know what the public wants. They even can see what the pressures are from growth. From do we why aren't we developing more battery storage? Why aren't we putting up more EV chargers? But they've got nobody that really has the expertise on how to write a contract, right? So that's just an invaluable type of service that APPA provides.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different, they may, have contracted a lot on things like local
Yeah,
rights of way management or equipment procurement, but this is, yeah, some of these issues, it's an evolution in our industry. There's every decade or so, we see some things that are really different that folks need to get their arms around. And
yeah. I heard, I was listening, when you were talking about um, when electricity was a brand new technology, but that brand introduction of brand new technologies doesn't stop, does it?
no, it's been a continuous journey for us in the electricity business. There's some areas that are more dynamic than others. Clearly, the rate of growth now, and in some of the other countervailing factors, retirement of thermal generation, especially coal, combined with that growth rate, combined with challenges of being able to get things sited and permitted to replace those resources, create new concerns for us that our industry and public power especially is trying to tackle. So
So the last thing I want to talk about for a few minutes here, Scott, is you mentioned the word dynamic. Dynamic. We live in a very dynamic political environment right now. And APBA is kind of in a unique position because you've got to have policy concerns at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level. So what are your, I know it's probably too big a subject to tackle in a few minutes, but what are your primary focuses right now?
yes, well, like you said, there is a lot there in a couple of minutes because we speak for hours on these topics every day. But yeah, in a nutshell, especially at the federal level, we've wanted to make sure as we're going through these new budget discussions this year that those basic key tools that communities need to finance their operations and their infrastructure, basic tax exempt municipal finance that has funded 75% of the key infrastructure in our country and is also valuable to investors as well, that stays in place as we're looking at the budget considerations this year, and especially in these tax and budget reconciliation bills. Those having those credits still available, the elective pay piece for nonprofit utilities, our members and the rural electric cooperatives as well. That's important. We focus a lot on grid security, making sure that we have the tools in place and the regulatory construct allows us to have appropriate cyber monitoring and defense and coordination, and physical infrastructure protection. And then some of those just reliable power supply overall. There's a lot of pieces that go into that, and I mentioned a couple of those elements around concerns about having adequate supply. One important element to that is permitting, what we call permitting
Mm,
reform. There's a lot of different forms to that, but mainly being able to make sure that where we're working, especially where we focus on the federal side, that the federal agencies are helping move along the ability to get the energy in place to support our communities and to support this economy. And there's some work to be done there. It can take way too long to site
yeah.
and permit any infrastructure, and especially electrical infrastructure. And we need to get our arms around that and get some progress in the federal government on that side. So.
Yeah, we're gonna. I got to tell you something, Scott. We're gonna have on our calendar for the podcast is a series of interviews about um, permitting reform. But that's all the time we have
Oh,
right
great.
now for this one. I want to thank you so much, Scott. Scott Corwin, President and CEO of the American Public Power Association, has been describing what publicly owned power is and what APPA has done and is doing to empower public power utilities to deliver affordable, reliable electricity. I also want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.